For Rand, the courtship continues.
The biggest obstacle we have as Republicans is demographics. We need to do better with African Americans, Hispanics, Asian Americans. I think I can bridge a gap no other Republican has ever bridged, and that is a gap to attract constituencies that we haven't talked to in 80 years.
That helps you get.
That gap Senator Paul wants to bridge is large. Mitt Romney attracted just 6% of the African American vote in 2012, but Rand Paul believes he can get that share up 27% in the next 2 years.
If Republicans have a clue and do this and go out and ask every African American to their vote, I think we can transform an election in one cycle. But I think there is fully a third of the African American vote that is open to much of the message.
Rand Paul, who is on the cover of Time this week, is certainly outspoken on matters of race and received praise for his bipartisan efforts with Senator Cory Booker on criminal justice reform. This week, Attorney General Eric Holder told MSNBC that he and Paul agree on more things than people would expect. But if Rand Paul really wants the GOP to go from 6% to 33%, he needs to stop dancing around the issue of voter ID laws. Here is Paul at Howard University last year.
Showing your driver's license to have an honest election, I think, is not unreasonable. And I think that's the main thing Republicans have been for.
This is what he said last August. I don't think there is objective evidence that we're precluding African Americans from voting any longer. But in May, Paul appeared to have a change of heart, telling the New York Times, everybody's gone completely crazy on this voter ID thing. I think it's wrong for Republicans to go too crazy on this issue because it's offending people. But when the inevitable conservative backlash came, Paul blinked. At no point did Senator Paul come out against voter ID laws, his office told reporters. And then Paul went on Fox News to split the baby, saying voter ID laws aren't wrong, but minorities feel that they are, and therefore the GOP should be careful, although it's unclear what careful actually means.
Republicans should be emphasizing the good things we're trying to do to try to help minorities vote instead of the things that many minorities feel is directed at them, right or wrongly. They feel that a lot of the discussion on voter ID is directed towards them. And so I do object to overemphasizing something that is turning people off.
And that's where Rand Paul keeps making the same mistake. It is not rightly or wrongly, it is rightly. Back with me now is former governor of Vermont and former chair of the DNC, Howard Dean, and joining me now is former chair of the RNC,
hey.
Michael Steele. Face off.
Face off.
Michael Steele, Chairman Steele. Let me ask you about what Rand Paul is doing here. Is empathy on the issue of voter ID laws an adequate substitution for action?
It is part of the first steps that you have to demonstrate before you can legitimize the action, or more importantly, the communities you want to speak to see that action as legitimate.
But do you think they will? I mean, do you think that the NAACP looks and says, okay?
I think, well, listen, it depends on what you say.
Right.
And it depends on how you come to the community with the conversation. What I admire about Rand Paul and what I really appreciate in his effort is that he's making the effort. He's being honest. He's exposing himself a lot more than any Republican candidate, potential candidate, has in 3 or 4 cycles, and that's almost 30 years. So the reality of it is you've got this individual who is reshaping right now the landscape going into 2016. The Times call him the most interesting man in politics. I call him the most dangerous man in politics because he has the ability to draw from the Democrats as well as the Republican bases in a way that could upset a few apple carts if this thing strikes the way he's talking.
Governor Dean, let's talk about Chairman Steele's contention that he could draw some Democratic support. I mean, I think on certain civil liberties issues, maybe. I mean, do you think his outreach to communities of color is enough to sway independents?
I don't think it's enough to sway anybody. First of all, I agree with about 3/4 of what Michael said. I think making the effort is important. What Rand Paul lacks is the willingness to lead, and that is why he backs off and changes his mind. Wait till you get to the primaries and see what he has to say when he comes under full attack from all his people. The fact is, Rand Paul has said some nice things, but he's done some terrible things. He tries to pretend he's a libertarian, but then he's totally against women having any choice in their own lives. Now, you can't get away with that because he's not going to get any young people's votes in the election, should he be the nominee, because people, when they find out what Rand Paul is really about, especially when they see him trying to compete in the right-wing primaries, it's not going to fly. So I think it's a good thing, because I'm the founder of the 50-state strategy, and part of the 50-state strategy is ask everybody for their votes. It's a sign of respect, and that's the good thing that Rand Paul is doing, is understanding that folks have agency, and you just can't run over whole sections of the population, which is what the Republican right seems to want to do. Is it enough? Unfortunately, not unless he stands up to his own party, and I don't think he's got the guts to do that.
That last, I agree about 3/4 of what Howard just said.
It's that sticky 25%.
It's that sticky 25%, and so he's right when he talks about whether or not he's going to stand up. I've said for almost a year now that the nominee of our party has to be prepared to have a sister soldier moment with the Republican base, where you basically say, shut up and get in line. We're doing this the right way this time, because these are the issues that these communities want us to talk about. So let's lay ourselves out there for them, expose ourselves. Let's get out of our comfort zones and have this conversation. If he does that, if he really goes across that line, I think that will be a defining moment in this effort to move the party closer to where communities of color live.
But let me just, okay, there are a couple things. One is, on the issue of voter suppression law, which seems to have deep and powerful resonance among communities of color and people in America who are not, part of the communities of color. You can be progressive on criminal justice reform. You can do a host of other things that would help Black people, Hispanic people, white people, numerous people in this country. But if you remain where the Republican Party is on voter ID laws, Michael Steele, I just wonder if that sort of wipes away any progress you might make on other issues.
You won't get street cred for the other stuff if the one fundamental constitutional thing is, you're not right on that. So I think that for Rand Paul, he's got to be able to connect that dot between those things like criminal justice and all the Cory Booker stuff that everybody's going, oh, nice. He's got to connect that dot to the fundamental underlying concern that the African-American community, perceived or real, doesn't matter.
Well, I think you should stop saying perceived or real, because
but I'm saying it doesn't matter what you think it is, perceived or real.
It's real for them. Yes.
You've got to address that, and if he does, then he opens himself up to a greater opportunity than if he sticks with the talking points and backs away from where I think his convictions really want to take him.
Right.
Governor Dean, let me ask you, both Chris Christie and Rand Paul have been talking a lot about the importance of opening doors, reaching out to communities that the Republican Party has not been talking to, and in many ways perhaps sidelining. Between those two men, as the chair of the DNC, former chair of the DNC, who do you think is a more formidable opponent in terms of broadening outreach, Chris Christie or Rand Paul?
Without a doubt, Rand Paul. Chris Christie is not going anywhere. First of all, because he's got his own problems at home, some of which are being investigated by a United States attorney. And second of all, because forget about it, is not a platform that gets you very far in Minnesota and Iowa, just culturally. So, look, I think here's the good thing about all this. This is good for the country. Even if they don't mean it, it's good for the country, because we've got to stop the horrible polarization that we have. This is actually why Michael and I get along most of the time. Because at the end of the day, well, we do. At the end of the day, you've got to build a country where everybody's in it together. And the instinct that Rand Paul has here is that he understands that much. Now, the question is, can he get away from these horror shows that have been going on in the last 4 years, climate change denial and voter suppression and all these things, anti-gay, anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, all that you can't win with. And Mitt Romney, who's a perfectly decent person, showed you can't win with that. So he is an intriguing candidate. I just don't think he's got what it really takes to convince a lot of people who have been victimized for a very long time that the Republicans are suddenly their party. But it's an important thing that he's doing, and I'm glad.
I think that we should take me off the air, which I'm sure a lot of people would agree with, and give this hour to Dean and Steele. Because it makes America feel better about America. You guys, Governor Howard Dean and Chairman Steele, it is always good to see you. Thank you for rounding out the week with me.